Buonasera a tutti e tutte.
Good evening, everyone.
Heike SOLGA, it's a pleasure to welcome her in Trento. It's her first participation in Festival of Economy in Trento. And this afternoon she will speak about the German model, the German social model, but especially about the things that are going wrong in the German social, which is... okay, sorry. Okay, I will... Is it okay now? Okay, thank you. Sorry. So I said that I welcome Heike SOLGA. Yeah, but okay. And she will speak today, this afternoon, about the German social model and what doesn't work in the German social model. And in a way, it sounds a little bit like a provocation in Italy, especially if we compare the youth unemployment rates in Germany, in Italy, or in France. In Italy, it reaches quite 25%. Quite 25% in France, 43% in Italy, and to compare with 8% in Germany. So Heike SOLGA is going to explain us what are the problems, the challenges behind the results of the German model. What does it mean in terms of social inclusion, social promotion, social mobility, social inequalities? This topic at the heart of research, of work. Heike SOLGA works at VZB in Berlin, Wissenschaftszentrum Berlin für Sozialforschung. She's director of the research unit called Skill Formation and Labor Market, and has been professor of sociology at the Free University of Berlin. Previously, she taught sociology at Leipzig University and work at the Max Planck Institute with a research group on lack of training, employment and life chances of the less educated. She's the author of several books and articles, especially about the debate on the social investment state model in advanced societies. The topic was in particular about the relationship existing between educational and economic inequalities, with the conclusion, and maybe we'll speak with her about that the role of education as an equalizer should not be overestimated. She worked also a lot about the social classification and the perception of the class affiliation. So now we'll come back to the perception of the German model and mainly the reality of that German model. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having such an interest in the German model of apprenticeship and school-to-work transition. And what I would like to do is to really introduce you into that model, because from the outside it looks much simpler than it is. And that would be the first part of my talk. And the second part of my talk is how that is embedded into the social reproduction. So how the vocational education and training system really contributes to social immobility instead of social mobility, what the theme of the festival is. I mean, I start with very simple figures, and what you see here is the youth unemployment rate in 2014, and we see, of course, huge differences. I marked in green Italy and in red the apprenticeship countries like Germany and Austria, and what you see is you have huge differences in youth unemployment. For many the apprenticeship system seems to be the reason behind these very low youth unemployment rates for several reasons. One reason is that it keeps young people in education, and the other reason is that they are better trained than in other countries. And so what we see now, after a long time that the OECD and others were kind of blaming Germany that it did not increase so much the university graduates but stick to its model of apprenticeship. Now, since the crisis, we have a new wave of appraisal, the German model. And sorry for taking only English language newspapers, but I don't speak Italian, so I couldn't see whether that is also a debate in Italy, but I guess. And here you have the English version, so the German economic strengths, the secrets of the success, and then the title of the photo is "It's because of the vocational education in Germany." Or take Ireland, saying we don't need higher education, we need more apprenticeship education. Or take the US, again, the secret or the success in the crisis is partly seen in the apprenticeship system. Now, apprenticeship systems have, of course, to do that you have firm-based training, and firm-based training, of course, is based on whether you have well-functioning firms. And you have also at the EU level the European Alliance for Apprenticeships, and part of that alliance is that there's the idea that you could send young people from Spain, Italy to Germany to do their apprenticeship there and then go back to the countries and work there. But if we look at the youth unemployment rate and the connection to the overall unemployment rate, then we see there is actually not a miracle of apprenticeship. What you see is the lower the overall unemployment rate is, no matter if you have a vocational education and training system or not, the youth unemployment rate is low. If the overall unemployment rate is high, the youth unemployment rate is high. So what you actually have is, if the economy is functioning well, then also the labor market entry for young people is functioning well. If the economy is functioning not well, then it doesn't matter what the training system is. I could finish my lecture at that point to say there's nothing to say for the apprenticeship system, but I will continue and I will show you it has part of that is still to the vocational education and training system, and the apprenticeship system is only part of that, one part of that overall vocational education and training system, and that other parts of that system are more responsible for having low unemployment rates, no matter what the economic cycles are. Okay, so the lecture is structured in the following way, that I would like in the first part, as I said, to introduce you into some insights into the German vocational education and training system, and to make it, not to say every time vocational education and training system, I use the term VET system, and it's more than what you learn in a minute, it's more than the apprenticeship system. The second is then to show you how that system contributes to social mobility and inclusion, where are the strengths, but where also the reproduction part of that system comes in. And I finish with a summary on the weaknesses, the challenges to the system, and to make it positive. And the end, I finish with the strengths of the systems and not with the weaknesses. Okay, let's start with the first thing. So what is the German vocational education and training system. Mostly, not only from the outside Germany, but also inside Germany. Mostly when we talk about the German system, we think about these pictures. Becoming a bank clerk, becoming a nurse, becoming a car mechatronics or industrial mechatronics. That is seen as, the German model. But as I will show you, the German model, it's much more than these kind of more highly qualified, trained occupations. So the first part is indeed, if we look into new enrollments into the VET system, that about half of these young people who enter the VET system are indeed in this, what we know as apprenticeship system, dual system, which is employment-based, workplace-based training, where young people have 3 days working in a firm, 2 days staying at a vocational school, and that for the majority for 3 years. There are some trainings that are 3.5 years, some trainings that are 2.5 years. But the majority for 3 years, it goes like that: 3 days working, 2 days being in a school. These occupations that are in the what we call the dual system, because of the workplace and the school-based training together, it's organized or regulated by the Federal Vocational Training Act. And all the things that are happening there have to be negotiated by 4 partners. That is the federal government, the governments of the 16 states, and the 2 social partners, the employers' associations and the trade unions. And they negotiate about training regulations for each occupation. So in the 1950s, we had 901 of these training regulations. For each occupation you can think of, we had a separate training regulation. Now we managed in the last 50 to 60 years to reduce that number into broader occupations, but still we have 329 different training regulations for the different occupations. If you compare that to Austria, there they have about 240. If you compare that to Denmark, they have about 127. So, and every time you want to change one of these regulations, the 4 partners have to negotiate. So it takes some time to modernize these kind of regulations. What is also often misunderstood, it's not apprenticeships do not only take place in manual jobs, manual occupations, but also in service occupations. And so what I have here as the figures, about 40% of the young men that are trained as apprenticeships are trained in service occupations like bank clerks or insurance clerk or something like that. Of course, for females, since the German labor market is a very sex-segregated labor market, in the young women are trained to 88% in these kind of occupations, and more in service occupations, not in craft occupations. And last thing on that is that not all German firms are involved in apprenticeship training. The first thing is you have to get entitled to do apprenticeships. So you need a trainer, you need certain conditions to really provide qualified training. And about 50% of the German firms have this entitlement to be allowed to train young people. But the last figure tells you that only about 25% of the German firms train. That means 75% of the German firms do not train. From the outside, it always is it's a question, especially among economists, why 25% of the firms put effort into training, and train, of course, also for the other 75%. And one can only understand that as a historical process and a kind of a societal commitment. And of course, among these 25%, the large firms like Siemens, VW, etc., are involved very much, so they train as a kind of their recruitment strategy. Okay, now you might wonder what are the other half of the German vocational education and training system. Oh no, before I say that, that looks like every occupation, every training in that system in apprenticeship is the same, but it isn't. Within these 25%, we can differentiate 4 segments. We have a lower segment, a lower middle segment, an upper middle segment, and a highest segment. And what are the definition of the segment is, it's based on the skill level these trainings have, but also on the employment career prospects these different occupations have. So let's start with the lower segment. So we do have apprenticeship to become a plumber, but also, for example, we have apprenticeship for 3 years to become a shop assistant. And these occupations, even though you are trained in, have a high risk of becoming unemployment afterwards. So the unemployment risk or the unemployment rate of a shop assistant is 14%. So it's, for German circumstances, very high. And about 1/3 of the trained shop assistants are marginally employed afterwards, meaning that they earn 400 euros per month. Of course, they have also very little work hours, but it's not their choice. I mean, it's more like the sector likes this kind of flexibility to have a lot of employees with very low social security standards, so you don't have to pay social security, and to be flexible in terms of working hours, to have long shopping office hours, etc. And then the lower middle are a lot of craft occupations and lower service management occupations. And then it goes up to the highest segment, and the highest segment is like bank clerks, insurance clerks, IT specialists, and you see the unemployment rate for them later on is 1%. It's even lower than for the university graduates. And this segment is actually a segment which in many countries you find in the college sector, which is in Germany still in the apprenticeship sector. So the first thing to note is to have an apprenticeship does not mean that the quality and the career prospects of when you complete an apprenticeship is the same for all, but that we have huge differences within this sector. Now we come, what is the other half of the vocational education and training system? We have another sector that is a so-called school-based programs, and these are still full qualifying. It's still a full qualifying sector. So the programs are there mainly in health, occupation, and social work. So to become a nurse in Germany, you go to a school-based, so-called school-based program. Or you become a social worker, you don't go to a university, you do it in a school-based sector. And these programs, vocational education and training programs, as I will show you, often require an Abitur, that is a kind of a high school degree, so the apprentices who do that could also go to university. And these young people, if they finish that, have rather high employment prospects in terms of security, but since these are mostly female-type occupations, the salary compared to what they have to train, the salary are rather low. Now, if you look at both sectors, the the point is that they do not so much differ in terms of whether they have the combination of workplace and school training, because also the nurses go 3 days a week into a hospital and do their training and stay 2 days a week in a school. Why we call the one thing the dual system and the other thing the school-based system has only to do with the governance structure. These occupations do not fall under the Vocational Training Act. So these programs are governed by the 16 German states. So the social partners are not involved and the federal government is not involved. But and in contrast to the apprentices, they don't have an apprenticeship contract with the firm, so they don't get an apprenticeship wage. They actually are living from their parents. So while these young people have a kind of an income, an apprenticeship wage paid by the firm, these young people don't have an income. They just do the same without an income. In both sectors, even though they are governed differently, the degrees you get, you can transfer between firms. So if you learned to become a nurse in one hospital, it is recognized in other hospitals. If you learn to become a car mechatronic in one firm, you can move to another firm, and that is also recognized and will put you into a certain layer of the wage ladder. Now, since the places are restricted, these two segments are very competitive, what I will show you now. This figure is the young people interested in this kind of full qualifying training. And that blue figure, the blue line, is what firms provide as training places. And you see that figure doesn't change that much. That figure changed very much, and that has to do with cohort sizes. So if a school-leaving cohort is large, then of course you have more young people who want to enter an apprenticeship. If the cohort size is smaller, then it is you have a lower part. And now you are wonder what happened. So sometimes we have really huge apprenticeship, you could say apprenticeship gaps, namely the difference between what the demand by young people and the supply by the firm. Sometimes, like in the early 90s, that is quite unbalanced if we don't look at regions, and we are not looking here at if the occupations match, so if what young people want to become trained and the places the firms provide in terms of occupations, but at least, in terms of numbers, it was quite good. But for most of the time, we have much more young people who want to become who want to be trained than we have training places. And this shortage is not taken up by fully qualifying training, but by a huge segment, what we call the pre-vocational programs. And in these pre-vocational programs, every year about 250,000 young people enter. So these 250,000 young people, they actually were searching for an apprenticeship, but were not successful in getting an apprenticeship place. And the system, so that's why it's in plural, it's programs. They are very different programs. You have, some are completely school-based, so the students go 5 days a week to a school. Some have some links to firms, so they also have a kind of a match. But the length is about up from half a year to 1 year. And in some programs, you can earn a higher general school degree. But definitely you do not earn a training degree. So, and when we look what happened to the young people, you could say, at least they are not unemployed. So these young people, who are in this sector lower the German youth unemployment rate, because we just, instead of letting them become unemployed, we keep them in the education system, so they don't pop up in the unemployment rate. Now, you could say that is at least one advantage, and it is, of course. I mean, it's some structure, but we have to look concerning what they do afterwards, because it could also increase frustration if you have one pre-vocational training after the others, and most young people have more than just one pre-vocational. If they can't enter eventually a fully qualifying training, then of course they get demotivated in further getting engaged in training, education, etc. And here we have a difference. We have, for some it is really a waiting loop, that they are just in their region, are not enough training places, so they stay for 1 year in a pre-vocational measurement, and then they enter the next year they enter a training place. That's more for the ones that have an intermediate school degree. They don't have a high school degree, but they have a lower secondary school degree, meaning they have 2 languages, they have science, etc. But in Germany, we also have a very low school degree, and for these young people, if they enter, and I will show you, they mostly enter these kind of programs, only 1/3 of them eventually will make it after some of these pre-vocational programs into a real apprenticeship program. Okay. Now to sum up the first part, so we have different school degrees. As I said, we have school leavers who have no school degree when they leave. We have school leavers who have a lower school degree, an intermediate school degree, and a university degree. All of them are entitled by law to enter an apprenticeship. There's no regulation on that you have to have a certain degree. The only thing what we have for the tertiary education level, we more or less, you need as a requirement a university degree. But in this sector, in the vocational education and training sector, actually there is no formal requirement. And I will show you now that even though there is de jure no formal requirement, de facto there are requirements. And these requirements have not only to do with skills, these requirements have also to do with social background. And here I come to the second part. How does this system of vocational education and training contribute to social, I would rather say immobility than rather mobility, in terms of that people from lower classes can end up in higher classes than their parents and vice versa? The first thing we have to note is that in Germany, the relationship between the educational degree of the parents and the educational degree achieved by the children is among the highest. So it's among the closest relationship. And I gave you not here the numbers in terms of how many percentage, but rather in a kind of a ranking. So in Finland, this link is weakest. So the mobility is highest in Finland, that also children from lower classes can achieve higher degrees than their parents. Whereas in Germany, it's among the countries that are really at the other end of the distribution. If we look at competencies, it's the same. I guess you know the PISA study. If you asked how strong is the link between the competencies students have acquired in school and the education of the parents, again, Germany is with Belgium and Hungary among the countries with the closest link. Finland is among the countries with the weakest link. Okay, that's why in the following, when I talk about social mobility, I will talk about the connection, the link between access to vocational training and school educational degrees of students, because de facto we talk not only about skills, we also talk about social background, because the different school degrees are very much structured by the class structure, the social class structure of Germany. Now, let's begin with a historical approach, and then come soon to the time today. These are the 100% are apprentices, young people in apprenticeship in 1970, and these are in 2011. And what you see here is what is the distribution of their school degrees. And what we see is that in 1970, about 80% of them had a lower school degree, the lowest, or even no school degree. And only 20% had an intermediate or high school degree. Now, if you look today, that has changed dramatically. Now about only 1/3 has a lower school achievement. The majority has an intermediate school achievement. And even about 1/4 has a high school degree, meaning these young people could also go to university but have taken an apprenticeship. So you see a huge educational increase in the distribution. So it's not the vocational education and training system is not anymore for low achievers. It's much more for higher achieving young people. If we look at the three sectors, so to which of the sectors the different groups have access, you see that's pretty similar to what I have shown you just before. For the school-based sector, remember these are the nurses, kindergarten teachers, social workers. We even find that it is even less inclusive for low-achieving young people, because only 18% have a low school degree, 57% have an intermediate school degree, and 24% have even a university entrance qualification. And if you look at the pre-vocational programs, you see that actually the programs are filled with what the apprenticeship system used to be, namely for the ones that have the lower school degrees. Now looking at the 4 segments of the apprenticeships I told you before, we see the same structure. In the lower segment, you remember these are the shop assistants and plumbers. We do see if the ones with lower school degrees can make it into an apprenticeship, it's mainly the lower segment, the occupations that are still, even if you are trained in precarious in terms of employment career. And if you go up the ladder from the lower middle to the upper middle to the highest segment, you see the increase of those having higher school degrees and coming from higher classes. So what you see is a in the vocational education and training sector, you see the replication of the social stratification of the German societies. At the bottom are the lower classes, and the higher segments of this sector are the higher classes. And the same is true if we now look coming more from the young people, the school leavers who have no school degree. They mainly end up in the vocational training, in the pre-vocational. If we look at the lower secondary school degrees, part of them make it, but as I showed you, rather to the lower occupations. And if you look at those who have a university entrance qualifications, they have a very low risk that they don't make it into apprenticeship if they like to. I mean, they always have the option to go to the university, where it's much less competition because you just go there and start to study. So now, the other problem is that although if you finish an apprenticeship or a school-based, fully qualifying school-based training, that is recognized as an upper secondary education degree. So it actually is classified at the same level as the Abitur, the university entrance qualification, the general upper secondary education degree. Nonetheless, it is very difficult for those who finish school with an intermediate degree, then do an apprenticeship, and then if they would like to go to the university. And what you see here is that, these students they are even called, that is also the narrative of German universities, they are called the non-traditional students because the traditional ones are the ones that do their general upper secondary degree at the gymnasium. So these are the real students, and then we have the non-traditional students that are the ones coming via vocational training. And you see de facto, these are 2% of the university population. So, as I said, de jure, there would be a lot of possible mobility within the German system. De facto, it's a very segmented and stratified system, and the vocational training system really contributes to the reproduction of the German society, transferring from the children to the parents. Now I come to my summary, what are the weaknesses and the challenges and the strengths. And as I said, so the weaknesses are more and more in Germany, how to integrate the low-achieving young people. Because the problem is, you could say in Italy also a lot of people don't have a university degree and don't have a training. But in Germany, that are about 15%. And so in the German model, you are only a person if you have either a completed vocational training and education program or a university degree. If you have neither a completed training nor a university degree, you are not a person on the labor market. So what we do see is that these people have a very high unemployment rate, have a very high rate of living off Social Security, and that from the very early beginning. So by the age of 25, if you don't make it into the university or into a fully qualifying training program, you know as a person that you have no chance on the labor market anymore. So there's also not much mobility afterwards. The second is that, as I told you, the regulation of the occupations. So we have these 329 plus the ones in the school sector. So let's say we have about 500 occupations. And you do need a degree to enter these kind of occupations in the labor market. If you want to change your occupation, you either have to do a new apprenticeship, which is difficult if you are older than 25, or you start to work as a semi or unskilled worker. So you have a downward move, because if you are once a plumber, it's not so easy to become a construction worker. You might become that, but not on the wage level of a skilled worker. So also the permeability between occupations, it's a problem. And about 1/3 of the graduates from apprenticeship systems change their occupation already in the first year after graduation. So it's not that they are lifelong in their occupation, but they finish, have their completed training program, and then still work as an unskilled or semi-skilled worker because they are not working in their occupation. And then, as I said, the permeability between the vocational education system and the higher education system is really still problematic. So one could conclude one of the real weaknesses, and that is in the literature for many years also, is that it contributes to social immobility in the German society, and that immobility starts, of course, in school, but then is reinforced with the segmentation of the training system. Now, what are the challenges? One of the main challenges is, of course, that the technological development in industry is faster than we can readjust our training regulations. I told you that the 4 partners are involved and they have to negotiate and they have to find a compromise. There is not that one of them has a major say. So it's really, so far, based on an agreement of all 4. So that takes time to negotiate. So technological change, the speed of technological change nowadays, it's faster than we are able to modernize our training regulations. And the second thing is, I will show you last graph, it's that we have a decreasing attractiveness for the higher achieving school leavers. If you look at the mid-1990s, you see that about 40% entered an apprenticeship, about 20% the university, and another 15% the school-based programs. Now, if you look at over the last 10 years or 15 years, you see that the apprenticeship share has declined and the university share has increased. And in the last 3 years, it was the first time in the German history that we had the same share, the same number of young people entering the university as entering the apprenticeship or school-based programs. And it's for firms, it is not clear what will be the future, if the green line is still increasing or if the green line is flattening and the apprenticeship line is increasing again. And that creates a problem for the firms, I will tell you in a minute. But you see here also is, the part that is adjusting to the economic cycles, to the business cycles, as you see here, are the pre-vocational training programs. It's not the school-based programs by the state, so they are rather flat. So it's really, if the demand is too large, that is taken up by the pre-vocational programs. So the problem for the firms is now that more and more of these higher achieving young people get an Abitur, so a university entrance qualification, and go to university. So part of the young people we had in former times in our apprenticeship and school-based programs are now not available anymore for firms. And so firms can do 2 things to increase the number of apprenticeship candidates. They can either go for the low achievers and try to readjust their training to get more out of these people in these pre-vocational training measures, because they are more than 250,000. Or they can invent new things for the ones that have an Abitur and would like to study. And at the moment, it looks like if the firms go more for the second pool of young people. And there's since the last 10 years, an increasing number of so-called dual study programs. That is, they combine not vocational schools and workplace training. They combine apprenticeship training and university programs. So these young people obtain their bachelor degree and an apprenticeship degree at the same time within 3 years. And these programs are very attractive. So they're attractive also in terms of that they attract school leavers with an Abitur with very, very good grades. So it's very competitive because the firms pay. So the university graduates in these programs get a payment, namely for the apprenticeship part. And these are mostly the apprenticeships that also pay high, like becoming a bank clerk, becoming an IT specialist. So it's more like in these higher level service jobs and in the ones that are close to become engineering. So they combine then mechatronics with the engineering part. So they are very attractive. And to just give you a number, if you look at Siemens, one of the biggest firms in Germany, each year they have 7,000 new incoming young people. In former times, these 7,000 were apprentices. Today, 3,500 are apprentices, and 3,500 are going to the dual program. So the firms, seems to be more the direction where they go in the future to attract higher achieving people. And as I said, I mean, that creates somehow a shrinking middle. So the firms don't like to take the low achievers. They still fight for the high achievers. And we have a shrinking birth cohort sizes in Germany. So they have actually the traditional pool becomes smaller and smaller. And another problem what is in this shrinking middle, there are also a lot of migrants. And so far, what all experiments and studies shows, German firms discriminate against migrants. And today we have about 40% of the birth cohort are migrants. So if they continue in the future to discriminate, then the pool of candidates gets even smaller. And if the pool gets smaller, then of course it's not clear whether the training system in Germany really will survive, because if you don't have people to become trained anymore, then there's no system. So if it is not attractive for both sides, then it is not a system anymore. Now, let me finish, as I said, with the strengths. And I think there is some strengths in terms of those who make it into the apprenticeships. They are integrated quite early into the labor market. So in comparison to other countries, we don't have this very strong polarized qualification structure. On the one hand, you have the 50% that have some college university education, and the other half has nothing. So that is not the case in Germany. So you have a rather broad inclusion into qualification in Germany, and also for the low and intermediate achievers, you do have some paths into the labor market, and that quite early. But as you see with this figure, you really have to make it into the apprenticeship, because about 60% of the apprenticeship graduates are then hired by their apprenticeship firms, so there's not much hiring outside. And what you also can say, I didn't talk at all about the German school system, which is really special, one could say, because it has so many tracks and specializes in so many things, so it's really very differentiated. And that creates also that the lower part of the educational distribution has very poor opportunities to acquire skills, general skills. And one could say by keeping these young people after compulsory education, so after grade 9 or 10, 3 more years in education also increases their skill level. So it might, the training system might mitigate some of the problems we have in the school system, because most of our young people, if they make it into the vocational training and education, have 13 years of education. And as I said, also in the vocational schools, they are not only trained in their occupation, but they have math, they have reading, they have physics, they have their second language. So because it is then recognized as a vocational upper secondary education degree. So I think that is also, one could say, kind of a strength to provide more young people, to keep them longer in the education system, to provide them with more skills. And I think that's it.
Thanks to Heike SOLGA for this information. Very important, and I would like to ask if you have some question. I would have several questions. I will ask first one. You spoke a little bit about the trade unions. The German trade unions in so many countries, especially in Italy, but also in France, are taken also like a model. I would like in that topics about social mobility and exclusion, inclusion. What is the duty? What is the position of the German trade unions? And of course, if you have some questions.
Now, probably because of time, you didn't spoke about the German educational system, but actually we can't get a real picture about the success or the failure of this system without having at least an idea about the educational German system. As you know better than me, you have at least 4 school types. Now you know that the handicapped people are discriminated in what you call Sonderschulen. Then you have Hauptschule, Realschule, Gymnasium. Gymnasium is reserved for the elite, probably the 10% of the population. And you have this huge number of people, I mean, Realschule, Hauptschule, Sonderschulen, and those people, as I know, they got probably just a few, if not nothing, as education, and I still keep asking. So how they made it, I mean, because I tried on my own to speak with people from this, the excluded ones, I mean, Sonderschulen, Realschule and Hauptschule. And these people have, as you know, probably the last study of the University of Hamburg have said at least, or 7 million of Germans that they can't read and they can't, how we say, write. So how Germany, that is confronted with these huge problems, can made it to give lessons to other people, how do they better their systems?
Yes. If you want to
okay,
first.
let's start. Is that okay with the mic? Yeah. So let's start with the trade unions. With the trade unions, that has changed over the years. So in the beginning of the 90s, I mean, of course, they were more looking at the level of apprenticeship and the quality of apprenticeships. And the debate about the pre-vocational training measures, they said, you know, that are not our clients because they are not yet in the firms. And then when we talked to them, we said, you know, but these are the children of your members. And so they started to agree, because the problem is, as I said, so the trade unions they have the idea that the apprenticeship has to be 3 years or 3.5 years. It's very difficult, for example, to modelize apprenticeships so that you can say, you know, maybe people are able to fulfill 2 or 3 of the modules, but not all. Or maybe people need not 3 years, but 4.5 years, and then they could complete. So if you are very strict and standardized, then you are less flexible for different learning environments and also learning curves. And now there is some change in the thinking, because they also realize that the firms rather go, as I showed, rather go this time to the dual study programs. And the point there is that the trade unions have nothing to say in the dual study programs, because that is a negotiation between the firms and the university. So all the other players are out. The federal government is not involved, the state governments are not involved, the employers' associations are not involved. So what the firms do is they provide the apprenticeship, and the university provides the university program, and then they collaborate with the chambers of commerce or the industrial chambers, that their students take an external examen and then get the qualification, the certificate for the apprenticeship. So I think in the past 10 years, the trade unions now learn that at both ends they have to do something. Now, coming to the school system and etc., you are completely right. I didn't talk much about that, and that was kind of my start in the 1970s. Those who went to the so-called Hauptschule, to the main school, as I showed you, made up the majority of apprentices. So they were like 80%. So that was, the idea was, we have the main schools, the Hauptschule, they go to apprenticeships, and we have the gymnasiums. These are the ones that go to university. And in the 1960s, 70s, that worked, and also the wages. I mean, that was the time when wages for skilled workers increased, and so that looked from the outside, that looked good. But as I showed you with education expansion, the firms changed their recruitment strategies, so they hired higher qualified young people, and they could so because I have showed you the apprenticeship gap. So they had much more people to select from, so they could really choose what they want, and now they are, more like they are so used to have at least intermediate educated school leavers and don't care anymore about the lower school leavers. Now the system somehow has changed in Germany, because especially the firms, one must say, are complaining about the poor performance of the German schools. And they said, we can't live with this segregated school system anymore. And now many of the federal states have introduced a school system that has a comprehensive path and the gymnasium, and so it's just the last 2-3 years, and we will see if things change. But the degrees will stay, so you still can leave with a lower school degree, with an intermediate, and with an upper school degree.
I have another question. You have said that in the 1970s, the majority of the people going to the Hauptschule did this vocational training. I would like to ask you, was there a difference between Gesamtschule, which was wanted by the socialists, and the Hauptschule? Were the people coming from the Gesamtschule were they going to get more, achieve better than people coming from the Hauptschule? Was there a difference?
Yeah, the problem is that we have so far, so until 5 years ago, we had only very few comprehensive schools, because only 2 or 3 federal states, German states, introduced it. Yeah, and then we have even in the comprehensive school system, I mean that's very German, we had different types. So you had really integrative comprehensive school systems, but we have also, like in Lower Saxony, that was not integrative. You had the different tracks within the school. So, I mean, that was then called Gesamtschule, but you still had a Hauptschultrack, a Realschultrack, and by that it's very difficult to say whether, but I mean, you know, at conferences, when the Germans are telling their results on the comparison between Gesamtschule or 6 year, 2 years more primary education together, etc. These things. All my international colleagues, they say, you know, the Germans are crazy about their school system because they can learn from outside, and all the other systems prove that they are better than the German ones. So they don't. We would not even need these kind of comparison, whether these students do better or not, because you have all problems of selectivities, whether the teachers are the same, etc. But as I said, now the system is changing. That has to do with firms, but also with demography. So in many rural areas, we don't have enough students going to the different school types anymore. And it's a very costly system to have so many different school types and to provide for each different school. No.
Two short questions. The first is, do firms have any advantages in having students, vet students, in their firms? I mean, economic advantages given by the state or something like that. And the second question is, if I understood correctly, students, when they have done their degree, they go in the firm, they work for 1 year, and many of them leave the firm because they don't like that job. So are students helped in choosing their vocational area or not? Mm-hmm. And if yes, how?
Yeah, so for the firms would get support to train low-achieving students, and some of the larger firms do it, but for example, taking Siemens, out of the 7,000 students in the apprenticeship system they have, about 100 you would qualify as low-achieving students. And what they do is, again, they put them into a different class. So they separate them from There are other firms that do not do that, and they are very successful because, I mean, it is a different learning environment, and some of the young people really, you know, were frustrated in school and do very well in apprenticeship, so sometimes it's not known before. But yes, firms do get some help, but of course, I mean, if they would train more, one could argue that they would need more help, so that they would need social workers, social psychologists maybe to help them. But I think that would be not a problem if they ask for, because we have this kind of system where firms can ask for money or for personnel, and what we see by the employment agency, and what we see that the money that is reserved for that is not asked for by the firms. So there would be a lot of resources still available. The second is with the vocational area. Yes, I mean, the students in school in the 9th, starting in the 8th grade, but more in the 9th and 10th grade, they do have internships that are mandatory during the school year, and they also have, it's a class called career guidance, so they have 1 hour per week, these kind of things. And the young people know quite well what they like to become. The problem is, of course, the match. I mean, if you would like to become a car mechatronics and there is no place, so you don't make it, then you might become an industrial mechanics or some other, craft work, and which you don't like that much. But so often the young people don't have the choice if they really can enter what they like to enter, because they are dependent on what the firms provide and who the firms choose.
There's one issue that I think is very important, and I would like to have some clarifications, which is the issue of streaming and selection. So our students, so you talked about all these different streams in school tracks and different programs in the vocational system. But the question is, are students free to choose what track and what segment of the vocational system they want to take? Or are they forced to go to specific types of schools depending on their achievement at some point of their career? So how does the allocation of the places work? You also just mentioned the fact that people may not find a place in the occupation they really want. Mm-hmm. But how are these, so are they searching for apprenticeships as unemployed people search for jobs, or how does the allocation work?
So in school it's different by the German states. So what is usually done is that at grade 4 or 6, depending whether the primary school goes until grade 4 or until grade 6, the teachers give a recommendation to which, based on performance, on grades, to which school type the child should go. And then there are federal states that say the prime say has a teacher, and there are states that say that's only a recommendation and it's up to the choice of the parents. And so one would think that, if it would be up to the parents, it's a more just system, but it's not. So what we observe is, if the teacher, the teacher have a social bias, no doubt on that. And also, kids from lower classes have less support to have good grades. But what we can observe, if it is up to the parents, then mainly higher class parents ignore the recommendation. If their kid has a recommendation by the teacher for the Hauptschule or Realschule, they ignore it and still put their kid into the gymnasium. And if there is no right of the parents to decide, but it's up to the teacher, then we see that can't be the case. And the other thing is that parents from lower classes are more, convinced to send their child to the gymnasium if the teacher says that the child. So it's really interesting, and there is a debate in Germany right now whether we should have still the right of the parents, or we should abolish, or we should have tests, and not the teacher's recommendation, but central tests at that stage. And with entrance into apprenticeship, yes, that works very much like the labor market. So it's up to the students. There is no, they can go, of course, to the employment agency like an unemployed person can go. And by that, of course, it depends very much on your parents, how much support you get in writing applications and finding a job apprenticeship advertisement. So it's completely similar to finding a job.
Well, I enjoyed your lecture, but I have a question regarding the effect of social mobility, or rather social immobility, as you said, say educational intergenerational immobility of the dual system. Currently, I'm carrying out a piece of comparative research together with Peter Blosfeld and Sandra Buchholz, comparing Italy and Germany. But it seems that the effect of parental class, parental, say, status group, and the parental education is declining across both cohorts, both in Italy and in Germany. And the graph you showed, the picture you showed earlier regarding the increasing amount of people attending university should go in this direction. I mean, so that there is a decline of this intergenerational educational mobility. Is that true, or maybe I'm wrong and my analyses are unsound?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not saying that there is no social mobility. But of course, we are not in the year 1950 anymore, but in the year 2015. And so it always depends on the expectation you have. And if you look at these non-traditional students, so having, a vocational upper secondary education degree, and how many really enter into university, you would still say that is too little. So it's not a really open society. The other thing is that we have a lot of studies by your colleagues Walter Müller and Rainer Pollack, which show, I showed you the young people who have a university entrance qualification but still go to a vocational training. And these are mainly those young people from having a working class background, making an Abitur, and then going to an apprenticeship and not going to the university. So the percentage of young people having an Abitur and going to a study program, it's much higher for the upper classes. You have very few that really enter an apprenticeship. But to at least, if your parents were a bank clerk, you want to become a bank clerk, nowadays you more or less need an Abitur. So the educational aspiration is, yes, if you look at school degrees, it's I need an Abitur, but that is not transferred as much as for the higher classes into university degrees. So for the German system, it is very important at which point we look for mobility and how, like, general education degrees are used then for the next step of the educational career, whether you go to university, whether you go to university for applied science, whether you go to apprenticeships, and then in the apprenticeship system to which of the different segments. So it's not so easy to say. But yes, of course, there is some social mobility, increase in mobility, but being a very modern society, it's astonishing how little that increases.
Maybe last question?
Yes.
No, two
I'm sorry.
Okay, so two last questions.
Yes, I would like to ask you for your take. I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry. I would like to ask you your take on this. As far as I know, there are at the moment a lot of big firms and enterprises in Germany offering complete degrees, like Deutsche Bahn or Lufthansa. So there are a lot of benefits for students who can just attend the schools, have their bachelor or master, and even a doctorate title in an enterprise. So my question is now, you mentioned before that also there are some firms and enterprises complaining about the quality of education. So will be this trend be set in the future, or is there really a problem in the training sector in Germany and in Europe? Thank you.
Here one must say that also the prognosis we have is that given the decreasing birth cohorts we are facing, and it's really, it's really dramatic. If we don't have immigration, then we really have a problem in Germany in the next years, because the cohorts that go into the pension system are so much larger than the birth cohorts entering the labor market. And also all the prognosis we have so far is that we will not lack university graduates. but we will lack exactly the higher skilled middle. And so that's why I think that's also why the firms try is this dual system, because what we had in former days is, yes, there were some of the people that had a university degree entered apprenticeship and then might still have done a university degree afterwards, which is a kind of crazy because they did their upper secondary degree twice, you would say, but that was the way it was. So they were lost for the firms. And with the dual study program, they try to keep them in the firm exactly for this middle layer. And so I think that it's not only because if you look at the type of industry we heavily rely on these kind of skilled workers. So I mean, car industry does not work only with engineers. That might be different for other countries, but given the types of industry we have.
Sorry, because there are two last questions here and here. I've promised.
Buonasera, parlo prima in italiano, poi traduco magari in tedesco. La conclusione.
Yesterday, I listened to a conference where it was said that social mobility is established in the first 3 years of life. And they took the example of Scandinavian countries where a high level at kindergarten guarantees a high cognitive correlation, which has an impact on the person throughout the career. So in Germany, what will be the impact of kindergarten guarantee, seeing that the society is aging and in the next 10 years we will need 500,000 immigrants per year in order to remain competitive? Shall I translate into German?
Interesting question, and it's there's always a debate between sociologists and economists. The economists are now moving, to the early child education, and the sociologists say it's not bad to do that, but a lot of problems will not be solved. And for example, for the German system, what you see, if you look at international studies like IGLO or PEARLS in the primary education, the German system is doing very well at that point. So there is mobility. So the primary schools are good to provide children from different backgrounds to provide a learning environment that they can reach higher levels of performance. It's not that the children from the lower classes catch up, but what we see is that the gap they bring from their homes are decreasing in Germany. And then when it comes to secondary school, then it goes up. So if we only, put effort into the kindergarten, so the problem is more at the upper end of the educational career, because then you can make things worse, and everything you implemented in the early life, if the later life is still depending on your parents, as I said, for example, the example was if the parents have the right to choose. So then you have very different educational decisions. And if they are very heavily depending on social class, then, and we do see that the parents from lower classes underestimate the ability of their children. So even so, you lift them up in the kindergarten, which is good. So I'm not complaining. I think it's a good thing to do that. But of course, the ability and the knowledge has to be acknowledged by the social environment. And so I think the education system still has a huge impact in what's happened in later life.
So my last question is about the graphic you showed in the relation between parents and the graduating levels of parents and children. And Italy did much better than Germany. So would you quickly say Italian school is better than German school in this way?
I mean, here it's only the, you know, if it is better, I mean, here it's not what you don't see is whether the competences achieved by the children are higher or lower. What it is telling here is that you could say that in terms of performance, in terms of reading or numeracy, Italy is less socially stratified than the German system. Because, I mean, you are at least at the 4th rank and not. But if you look at this graph, you lose that by the education system. So not all the mobility in terms of competencies are translated into degrees.
Yeah, but that may be because in Italy we don't find a job always compared to our abilities. So maybe it's better to study in Italy and work in Germany. Maybe, I don't know. I'm asking if you have to choose.
Yeah, but here, you know, that is about degrees. So I think one of the problem here is that you really have this more like having university degree or not. And if you come from a lower class but still have high competencies at age 15, not every parent from the lower classes can manage to send the child, even though it's a public university system, but at that time, you know, you don't earn that what you would earn if you work. So you would still think you have a good education system in terms of social mobility of competencies. I mean, we would have to look what it means in terms of level of competencies. But you lose it somehow when it gets to transfer the competencies into educational degrees.
Thank you very much, Heike, SOLGA, for this very interesting and stimulating discussion. Thank you.